Her smile was flawless, a practiced curve of her lips as she slid the heavy, glossy paper across my polished dining table. The afternoon sun spilling through the bay window caught the sheen of it, making the palm trees on the cover look almost real. "I found it, Eleanor," Catherine said, her voice a careful blend of sympathy and excitement that always set my teeth on edge. "A place where you won't have to worry about a single thing. It's called Golden Palms, in Florida." My son, David, shifted in the chair beside her, his gaze fixed on a spot just over my shoulder, a familiar tell when he was trying to avoid a difficult moment. I picked up the brochure. The paper was thick, expensive. The photos inside showed smiling, silver-haired people playing tennis, painting watercolors, and dining on a veranda overlooking the ocean. It looked less like a home and more like a permanent cruise. Catherine had even placed a thin file next to it, filled with her version of my recent life. There was a printout of an email, supposedly from me to our accountant, filled with confused questions about a simple tax form. There was a photo of a utility bill marked past due that she claimed to have found under a sofa cushion. Each page was a carefully placed stone in the wall she was building around me, a wall to cut me off from my own life. I smiled back at her, a placid mask of acceptance I had perfected over the last 5 years. It was the same smile I gave contractors who tried to overcharge, the same smile I gave competitors who underestimated the woman who balanced Vance Relity's books for 40 years. My eyes, however, drifted to the evidence file she'd left so casually on the table. My gaze caught a detail on the final page, a page meant for my eyes to miss. A petition for conservatorship, already drafted by her lawyers. And at the bottom, next to a space for David's signature, was another line, medical evaluation by Dr. Alastair Finch, a doctor whose name I had never heard in my entire life. The front door clicked shut, and the silence of the house settled back around me like a heavy blanket. The scent of my husband's pipe tobacco, once a comforting presence in his study, had never felt so faint. On the coffee table in the living room sat Catherine's pristine file, a monument to her betrayal, resting beside the teacup that had gone cold in my hand. For a long while, I just sat there, listening to the old house breathe, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall measuring out the seconds of this new, lonely reality. I walked through the rooms that held the map of my life. I ran my hand along the worn leather of Robert's favorite armchair, the place where he would sit and read the paper every evening, his feet propped up on the ottoman. This house on Queens Road wasn't just brick and mortar. It was a living archive of our partnership, our dreams, and the family we'd raised. Now, it felt like a museum, and I was the last exhibit, about to be packed away into storage. I picked up the file again, my fingers tracing the crisp edges of the paper. Catherine was methodical, I had to give her that. It was all there, a neat, orderly narrative of my decline. Then I saw an email she had helpfully printed for me, an official correspondence that had just come in. It was from her lawyer to my own. The subject line was chillingly simple, stripped of all pretense. E. Vance conservatorship, initial filing. There was no greeting, no professional courtesies, just a date for a preliminary deposition in 2 weeks. It wasn't a warning, it was a countdown. I didn't go to the safe where Robert kept our important papers. I didn't reach for the phone to call my lawyer, not yet. Instead, I went to my sewing room, the small, sunlit space where I mended tablecloths and hemmed David's trousers when he was a boy. I opened my old sewing box, a dark cherry wood case from my own mother, and lifted the top tray filled with spools of thread and silver needles. Underneath, nestled in the soft velvet lining, was a small vintage thumb drive shaped like a red rose. Robert had given it to me years ago as a silly little gift, but it had become my vault. I took it to his study, sat down at the heavy mahogany desk, and plugged the rose into the side of my old desktop computer. The machine hummed to life, its familiar whir a quiet comfort. On the screen, a single, password-protected folder appeared. I typed in the code, the date of our first real estate deal back in 1973, and the contents opened. It was my own collection of artifacts, my counter-narrative. There were time-stamped keylogger files from a simple program I'd installed, documenting every time Catherine accessed my personal banking from an unfamiliar IP address. There were original, unaltered drafts of company documents, saved with their original creation dates, before she had gone in and changed figures or clauses to make me look forgetful. I clicked open the last file. It was a screen recording from 3 months prior. It showed my own email account being accessed, a new email being drafted to our family lawyer expressing confusion over our finances, and at the bottom of the screen, plain as day, was the IP address. It traced back to a cafe 2 blocks from Catherine's office in Boston. My first call wasn't to a high-powered attorney in a downtown tower. It was to a young man named Marcus, whose small tech auditing firm operated out of a modest office in Raleigh. Robert had taken him under his wing years ago, seeing a sharp, honest mind in a kid who could make computers sing. We met at a quiet diner halfway between our cities, a place with worn vinyl booths and the smell of fresh coffee. I laid everything out for him on the sticky tabletop, my old laptop open to the contents of the Rose thumb drive. Marcus didn't flinch as I explained. He just stirred his coffee, his eyes fixed on the screen as I showed him the IP address from the Boston cafe. "She got arrogant, Mrs. Vance," he said quietly, his voice calm and even. "People who think they're the smartest person in the room always get sloppy. She used her own work server for the final document alterations." He validated every suspicion I'd had, not with sympathy, but with data. He showed me how to read the metadata, how to see the digital fingerprints she'd left everywhere. He saw the cold logic of her plan, but more importantly, he saw the holes in it. He looked down at the copy of the conservatorship petition I'd brought. His finger tapped the page. "We don't go after her directly," he said, closing his laptop. "That gets messy. We go after her evidence. We dismantle it piece by piece until she has nothing left to stand on." Who are these 2 people listed as corroborating witnesses? I looked at the names. I had never seen them before. "I can't find any connection to you or your family," he finished, his expression hardening. "Let's start there." The first witness, according to the petition, was a home care nurse who had performed a wellness check on me 2 months back. Marcus tracked her down in less than a day. He spoke to her on the phone, his voice professional and disarming, introducing himself as an independent auditor reviewing family care records. The nurse remembered the visit clearly, but not for the reasons Catherine would have wanted. "The daughter-in-law did all the talking," she told Marcus, her voice crisp over the speakerphone in his office during our follow-up call. "She kept asking me if your mother-in-law seemed disconnected. She tried to frame every question that way. Does she seem confused by her mail? Is she having trouble recalling recent events? It was odd." The nurse explained that I had been perfectly lucid, answering all her medical questions with clarity and even asking some sharp ones of her own about new blood pressure guidelines. "Honestly," the nurse continued, "I got the feeling Catherine was disappointed that I wasn't finding anything wrong." Marcus listened patiently, letting the silence hang for a moment before he asked his next question. The nurse hesitated, then added, "After I submitted my report saying Mrs. Vance was in excellent health, I got a call from Catherine's assistant canceling all future appointments. She said they'd found someone more suitable." A chill went down my spine. Marcus's final question was quiet but direct. He asked if she still had a copy of her original report. She did. Dated, detailed, and it completely contradicted every claim Catherine had made about that day. "This isn't just a lie, Mrs. Vance," Marcus explained a few days later, sharing his screen with me over a secure video call. "It's a constructed timeline. She's been building this for months." He had a grid on his screen, a spreadsheet that looked impossibly complex to me. In one column were the dates of Catherine's fabricated incidents. In the next, he had pulled data from Vance Realty's corporate servers. "See here," he said, highlighting a row. "The timestamp on this doctored bank statement she claims you were confused about is 2:17 a.m. on a Sunday. The server logs from her firm show her logged in at that exact time, remotely accessing the company's financial software. She wasn't at home helping you, she was in her own office, creating evidence." He walked me through it, instance by instance. The email I supposedly sent in a state of confusion was drafted and sent from her work laptop during a board meeting she was chairing. The misplaced bill was scanned into the company's digital archives by her assistant the day before Catherine found it at my house. He had cross-referenced everything, weaving the digital breadcrumbs into a perfect, damning timeline of deceit. It was cold, methodical, and irrefutable. "She's filed the petition," Marcus stated calmly, his face serious on my screen. "Our turn. I'm advising your lawyer to file a motion for discovery, specifically requesting all of Catherine's electronic records and communications for the past 6 months. It's a standard request in a case like this. She can't refuse it without raising immediate suspicion. The order goes in, quietly, tomorrow morning." While Marcus worked his digital magic, I turned to the physical world, the paper world that Catherine seemed to think was so obsolete. I spent an afternoon in Robert's study, going through old file cabinets, looking for tax records my lawyer had requested. My fingers, dusty with the residue of old Mnemo folders, brushed against a slim file I hadn't seen in years. I pulled it out. Tucked inside an old tax folder from 1988, as if our company's soul was just another receipt to be filed away, was the original mission statement Robert and I had written. It was on a yellow legal pad, his strong, clear handwriting filling the page. We hadn't written about profit margins or aggressive growth. We had written about community, trust, integrity, and building relationships that lasted longer than the mortar in our buildings. It was the heart of everything we had built. Clipped to the back of that page was a more recent memo, one I had typed up 2 years ago, suggesting we reaffirm these founding values at a company-wide meeting. I remembered Catherine's polite dismissal, her comment about focusing on the future, not the past. I had let it go at the time, another small concession to keep the peace. But now, seeing it again, my eyes caught something new. In the margin of my memo, in Catherine's sharp, precise handwriting, was a single dismissive note, clearly intended for her assistant. "Charming, but not profitable. File away and let me know when she forgets about it." I stared at the words, the ink a testament to her long-held contempt. I took out my phone and captured a high-resolution photo. Copied. Timestamped. Ready by morning. A few days later, an email from my lawyer arrived. The subject line was my name. The body of the message contained just 2 words: motion granted. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I simply sat back in my chair and took my first full, deep breath in what felt like weeks. A judge had signed the order. Catherine was now legally compelled to turn over her electronic records. The trap was set. She would have to either produce the very data that would incriminate her or refuse and effectively admit she had something to hide. It was a quiet, procedural step, but it was a monumental victory. The very same afternoon, a different kind of correspondence arrived. A courier delivered a thick, cream-colored envelope. Inside, on heavy, gold-embossed cardstock, was an invitation to the Vance Realty's 50th anniversary gala. A tribute to Robert and Eleanor Vance, it said, in elegant script. I ran my thumb over my own name. The entire event, I read, was being planned and hosted by the new CEO, Catherine Vance. It was to be a celebration of the legacy she was actively trying to steal. She was curating a tribute to the very woman she was trying to have declared incompetent and erased from the company's future. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I walked into that gala feeling like a ghost visiting her own memorial. Near the entrance, they had a large black and white photograph of Robert and me from the early days, smiling and full of hope. The caption underneath read, "The Visionary and His Inspiration." An inspiration, a muse, not a founder, not a partner who had worked late into the night over ledgers and contracts. I smoothed down my silk dress and played the part they had assigned me, the frail, smiling matriarch, a beloved relic. People came up to me all evening, offering their sympathies for my recent difficulties, their voices hushed with the gossip Catherine had no doubt carefully seeded. I accepted their concern with a gracious nod, my eyes scanning the room. I watched Catherine move through the crowd, a queen in her court, charming board members, her hand resting reassuringly on David's arm. I drifted near a group of investors and overheard Catherine speaking with the company's lawyer. "It's for the best," she was saying, her voice low and serious. "We're finalizing her transition to a more comfortable life right after the deposition. She deserves to rest." Later, on a display table of company milestones, there was a framed copy of a new community promise statement authored by Catherine. As I read the flowery language, a key phrase jumped out at me, one about building foundations of trust for the next generation. I recognized it instantly. She'd lifted it directly from an email I wrote a year ago while recovering from a nasty bout of pneumonia, a week she later included in her file as a time I was too confused to discuss business matters. The day after the gala, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end was hesitant, his voice low. He had been Mr. Vance's executive assistant for 10 years, he explained, and he thought there was something I needed to know. We met for coffee at a small cafe far from the city center. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped. "She fired me last month," he said, stirring his cup without looking at it. Said my position was redundant. The truth is, I knew too much about how Robert did things. He told me he'd been loyal to my husband's memory, but Catherine had made his life impossible, systematically replacing the old guard with her own people. He opened a worn leather planner on the table between us. It was filled with meticulous notes. He showed me entries from the past year detailing suspicious requests from Catherine, to find old company letterhead from the 90s, to schedule odd meetings with estate lawyers he'd never heard of, to backdate a memo. He flipped to a page from 3 months ago. "Here," he said, pointing to an entry, "7:43 p.m., a Sunday. She called me at home, asked me to come to the office to attest that I saw you sign a change to your personal asset management. A simple transfer," she said. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and regret. "But I never saw you. She brought the paper to my house to sign. I thought it was strange, so I checked the building's security logs the next day. The corporate office was closed all day. Her key card was never used. Your key card was never used. You were never there." The letter from Catherine's lawyer arrived a week before the deposition. It was polished and cold, a final offer designed to sound like a kindness. If I agreed to voluntarily move to the facility in Florida and sign over my voting shares to David, to be managed by Catherine, of course, they would withdraw the petition. They were framing it as a way to avoid a stressful public hearing for the family's sake. Catherine was spooked by the discovery order. This was her attempt to intimidate me into folding before she had to turn over her files. She was offering me a gilded cage in exchange for my surrender. I read the letter twice, then slid it across the desk to my own lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Albright, whom I had hired on Marcus's recommendation. She read it, raised an eyebrow, and looked at me. "Well?" she asked. "I think not," I said. My lawyer's rebuttal was sharper and much, much shorter. It was a simple 2-sentence response declining the offer and confirming our attendance at the deposition as scheduled. But Miss Albright had added a little something of her own. Attached to the refusal was a single addendum. It was a formal request to have an independent digital forensics expert present at the deposition. His purpose would be to do a live comparison of Catherine's submitted evidence against the metadata from her firm's servers, which she was now legally compelled to provide. The request was a procedural formality, one the court greenlit that very afternoon. The final piece was in place. The faces appeared in neat boxes on my computer screen. Catherine, looking poised and confident in her pristine home office. Her lawyer, a smooth-faced man with an expensive suit. My son David, his expression a mask of pained duty, looking anywhere but at my square on the screen. And then there was me, Miss Albright, and Marcus, each in our own quiet spaces. As you can see, Catherine's lawyer said smoothly over the Zoom call, displaying a document on the shared screen, Mrs. Vance's pattern of confusion has been escalating for some time. He walked them through their carefully constructed timeline, presenting the altered emails, the manufactured financial statements, the disingenuous notes. Each slide was a dagger. I looked at David's face, at the conflict warring there. He wanted to believe this was an act of love, of protection. He wanted to believe his wife was doing the right thing. When their presentation concluded, a heavy silence fell. Miss Albright spoke, her voice calm and clear. "Thank you. We have no questions at this time. We do, however, have a brief presentation from our own technical auditor." I simply nodded at Marcus. His face appeared as he shared his screen. It was a split-screen display. On the left was one of Catherine's key pieces of evidence, the email showing my supposed confusion over my finances. On the right, Marcus displayed the email's raw metadata. "This email," Marcus said, his voice devoid of emotion, "was authored and sent from an IP address that geolocates to the Copley Plaza in Boston on March 14th at 2:15 p.m. He paused. "Company records show that on that date, Catherine Vance was attending a conference in Boston. Eleanor Vance was at her home in Charlotte." He did it again, and again. For every piece of fabricated evidence, he calmly matched the document to a timestamp, an IP address, or a server log that proved Catherine was the sole creator. The final image he displayed was the security log from the Vance Realty building for the day the key witness, Robert's former assistant, claimed he saw me sign a document in the office. The log was a sea of red text: access denied, system offline, holiday. A profound, damning silence filled the virtual room. Catherine's face, projected in high definition, had gone from poised to a pale, stark white. Her lawyer stared, his mouth slightly agape. David unmuted his microphone, his voice a choked whisper. "Postpone this," he said, his voice cracking. "We need to postpone." There was no apology, not from her. The official letter came from her lawyer less than 24 hours later. It cited a desire to prevent further stress on the family as the reason for withdrawing the conservatorship petition entirely. It was a coward's retreat, wrapped in the language of concern. The real negotiations happened behind the scenes. Catherine stepped down as CEO of Vance Realty, effective immediately. It was part of a quiet settlement agreement that included a strict non-disclosure clause, which suited me just fine. I had no desire for a public spectacle. My goal was never revenge, it was restoration. I was reinstated as the majority shareholder with full control. That evening, David came to my home. He stood on the porch, unable to meet my eyes, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He didn't make excuses for her. He just apologized, his voice thick with a shame that was long overdue. He handed me a handwritten note from himself, a long, rambling letter of regret. Tucked inside was another piece of paper, a single sheet folded in half. It was a note Catherine had been forced to sign as part of the settlement. Her signature, usually so bold and confident, was a shaky, thin scrawl I barely recognized. The note contained only one line: "You were right to protect what mattered." My first act wasn't to purge the company of everyone Catherine had hired. That would have been her way, not mine. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what she had tried to tear down. I established the Vance Family Archive, a project to create a digital and physical library of our company's true history. We scanned old photographs, transcribed Robert's handwritten notes from early deals, and recorded interviews with employees who had been with us for decades. I wanted to create a permanent record of the handshake deals, the community partnerships, and the people-first philosophy that Catherine had dismissed as charming but obsolete. I spent weeks visiting old project sites, not as an inspector, but as a neighbor. I had coffee with the man who ran the community center we had funded 30 years ago. The plaque on the wall had weathered, but the promise behind it hadn't. That was the legacy I chose to restore. One afternoon, while sorting through Robert's old office, I found a sealed manila envelope tucked behind a dusty ledger from our first year in business. His name was on the front, in his own hand. Inside was a letter he had written to me 5 years before he passed, outlining his hopes for the company's future should anything happen to him. It was full of his usual wisdom and warmth. It ended with a final, prescient sentence. "If you ever have to choose between a clever mind and a good heart, Ellie, always protect the heart." When I walked into the boardroom for the first time as acting chair, they didn't applaud. The new and old faces around the long table just watched me, a quiet understanding passing through the room as I took my seat at the head of the table. The chair felt familiar, solid. I wasn't there to rule with an iron fist. I was there to steer the ship back to its true course. I wore a small rose-shaped pin on the lapel of my jacket, a subtle nod to the little thumb drive that had held my truth when no one else would. The meeting was productive, focused. We talked about projects, about community outreach, about reaffirming the values in that old, handwritten mission statement. There was a new energy in the room, a sense of relief, of a foundation being reset on solid ground. After the meeting, I didn't linger. I walked out of the building and stood on the plaza, the cool Charlotte air on my face. The city skyline, the one Robert and I had helped build, stood against the open sky, a testament to a lifetime of work. I felt free, not because I had won a fight, but because I had reclaimed my own story. It was finally written, in my own hand, in a way that could never be erased again.